My God, I hate drugs.
Duterte wants someone else to head the transition government, which will be set up once the federal constitution is ratified. He's already asked the consultative committee drafting the new charter to make sure this happens. He also informed his cabinet about his plan that could effectively end his term long before 2022. Our senior correspondent Ina Andulong tells us the president has actually been talking about wanting to step down early for a while now.
A shock to the cabinet. That's how presidential spokesman Harry Roque described the mood in Malacanang when President Duterte told his alter egos that he's ready to cut his term short.
Dahil siya'y pagod na. He said he was very tired, he is old, and siguro itong electing a transition leader would enable a younger leader to take over. He said it kasi with conviction that's why ako medyo nalungkot ako. No?
The president made the announcement at the beginning of Monday's cabinet meeting. Speaking to his secretaries, most of whom his trusted friends, he said he has no plans of heading the transition government that will kickstart the shift toward federalism. The transition government would be set up once the new constitution is ratified, something which the president sees happening as soon as 2019. So if it does happen, President Duterte and his men may only have a year or so left in Malacanang.
Well, medyo nashock siguro yung gabinete kasi parang this is the first time na nagsalita talaga ang presidente na ayaw na niya beyond 2019. No? So ako mismo nalungkot ako dahil parang definite statement na yon na magbibigay na siya sa isang mas batang leader. So if the constitution is ratified, that's it for all of us in the cabinet.
President Duterte's remarks may have surprised many, but it's actually not the first time he said it. He said something similar just last week.
Kay Puno ngayon, committee, to make the final changes. Make me president only next year, 2019, and I will accept it.
Last February, his words were clearer. He wants to get out soon.
I am also in a hurry to go down. If there can be a working federal setup by the year 2020, I am going to step down. I do not want any transition position.
But no matter how many times he says it, it's easier said than done. There are questions on the constitutionality of what he wants to happen. Cut his term short, then have someone else take over and practically finish off the rest of his term.
It will be constitutional because it will be pursuant to the transitory provisions of the Constitution which the people may ratify. Kaya nga pinabago niya yung transitory provision para i-recognize na yung transition leader will have to be elected. In other words, yung bagong saligang batas, kung iraratify ng taong bayan, will be the instrument that will cut short the term of the president.
Before the draft federal constitution goes through a plebiscite where people will vote on whether or not they want the new charter, it will still have to hurdle lawmakers. Malacanang says the president will push his allies in Congress to back him up. This early, though, senators are saying changing the constitution is not their priority. This means our tired president may just have to wait a little longer. Ina Andulong, CNN Philippines.
The Consultative Committee to review the 1987 Constitution has agreed to the President's requests. They will include a provision in the proposed federal Constitution that would allow Mr. Duterte to step down once the new Constitution is approved in a plebiscite. Alongside this, a provision that would allow the election of a transition leader who will have the powers of a president. CONCOM has also added another provision which will require the incumbent Vice President to step down. This is so a transition vice president can be elected in tandem with a transition president. All appointees of President Duterte will also have to vacate their posts once transition leaders are in power. The bicameral conference committee is almost complete in its deliberations on the contentious provisions of a proposed Bangsamoro Basic Law, but heated discussions among members of a subcommittee defining the Bangsamoro government's territory has resulted in a deadlock. Our senior correspondent, David Santos, joins us from Ortigas for the latest. David, what happens now? How will this deliberation move forward?
Well, Pia, definitely they will need to break this stalemate. So instead tonight, the joint House and Senate committee is eyeing a final report tomorrow Wednesday. Senate Majority Leader Miguel Zubiri says today's debate at one sub-level committee was so intense, they decided to, quote, give it one more night to sleep on. The bone of contention, whether to include the 6 municipalities in Lanao del Norte and the 39 barangays in North Cotabato to become part of the Bangsamoro government's core territory.
Yeah, dyan medyo madugo. And I understand the positions of the district congressmen because it is a loss of territory for them and medyo mabigat yan at malalim.
Despite some members like Zubiri who support the BBL, the committee will have to make the tough choice. They are extending this deliberation for another day just to resolve this particular issue. Now, otherwise, all other contentious issues, Zubiri assures, have been or will be resolved before this day ends. And just like Monday, they could again go on with their discussions until late this evening. Now, these completed provisions are: 1, the powers of the Bangsamoro government; 2, its taxes and fiscal autonomy; 3, creation of a regional police force as part of its public order; 4, its own justice system, including Sharia law; and 5, it's set up under a parliamentary system. So after tomorrow's deliberation, which Zubiri says represents only about less than 10% of the proposed law, they are likely to come up with a final consolidated version of the BBL. Pia?
David, one of the contentious provisions in the Senate version, whether to allow the Bangsamoro government to purchase firearms or spend on defense equipment. How is this resolved?
Well, the Senate got its wish, denying the Bangsamoro government the authority to spend on weapons and military equipment. Apparently, Senator Zubiri says some of those present during the deliberations of this particular provision were offended by the Senate's move. In fact, Zubiri said senators had to apologize while insisting on their argument. Now, here's Senator Zubiri's explanation.
What if it's a different leadership? What if 30 years down the line, when we are already old and gray, there's a new brand of leadership that goes into the Bangsamoro and they're radicalized and they want to try to secede or want to try to do some foolishness, and they buy firearms, tanks, airplanes with these funds. This law will not allow it. This provision will not allow that.
Now, as a compromise, the Senate has agreed to grant the Bangsamoro government its own taxing powers. It will also get automatic appropriation of its annual budget and will no longer be required to submit papers or documents the Senate version had earlier insisted. Pia.
David, how important is this for the MILF, the More Islamic Liberation Front? This could signal the end of their decades-long struggle.
Well, Pia, we must remember that the BBL, as a proposed law, has never gone this far in terms of the legislation process. The Aquino government, which is credited for signing the peace deal with the More Islamic Liberation Front, or MILF, as we all know, its Congress junked the BBL. So this is the second attempt to have the BBL enacted into law. Now, compared to a marathon, it's almost like reaching the finish line. And that is attributed largely to President Duterte, who has publicly expressed support for the BBL, acknowledging historical injustices against the Moros and the need to correct it. Now, earlier, I spoke to Gadzali Jaafar. He is the chairman of the body that crafted the second version of the BBL. At the same time, he is also the MILF's vice chair for political affairs. He tells me how significant this latest development is for their rebel group.
Santos there.
Well, we had this quote from him. Mr. Jaafar was supposed to say that the Moros have been fighting for nearly 5 decades and for almost 50 years. They're now finally seeing a realization of this dream. Now, whatever the outcome of the final bicameral committee report will be, Jaafar says, they will leave it up to the Bangsamoro people to decide whether to accept it or not. That will be done through a referendum, Pia.
David Santos there reporting. Vice President Leni Robredo praises President Duterte's move to agree to a moratorium on statements against the church. President made the decision during a meeting with Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines President Romulo Valles on Monday as part of efforts to ease tension with the church in the wake of his remarks about God and Christianity. Robredo says the moratorium is a good reminder for public officials to be respectful, especially when it comes to religion.
Kahit meron kaming freedom of expression,